Next up, we have Tyler Smith, the offensive lineman out of Tulsa, who, for me at least, is a funny evaluation to do because I'd actually completed and graded him in late January, early February. And at the time, I distinctly remember one source, thedraftnetwork.com, they had Tyler Smith ranked as their 134th highest graded prospect, which in contrast with me having him as my 21st highest guy was distinctly different. So that one stuck out in my mind as one of the guys I was significantly higher on than it seemed the national media was. But it seems as though after his combine performance, after maybe people have revisited the film, they've realized that maybe there's a little bit more to Tyler than perhaps what initially met the eye. And in that regard, I think that some people are starting to see things the way I see them. Is I've seen him in a few first round, in a few people's first round mock drafts, right? Which is kind of radical, all things considered, in terms of that meteoric rise. So one of the reasons that I do think that he has started to rise is the combine performance. Just very quickly, he had a 5.02 40-yard dash, which is very good for a 6'4.5", 324-pound offensive lineman. One thing that I will note that I did think was interesting is at the time when I filled out my eval sheet, Tulsa had him listed as 6'6", 332, so he actually came in significantly shorter and a little bit lighter, which generally isn't the way you want to go, but that's likely one of the reasons that he tested a little bit better than you might have expected, because a 4.65 shuttle, a 7.78 three cone, 27.5-inch vertical, or an 8 9-inch broad jump, those are all very, very solid testing measures for a guy that, if he was 332-pound Tyler Smith from midseason form, I don't necessarily know if he would have had as good of measures, but I did think he was a pretty solid athlete. That was one of my notes. Considering his size, I had right here, has looked like a decently explosive guy, especially for his size, particularly in the open field. I thought it was very interesting because I do want to note they had him playing tackle, so there was some projection that was going on here. I had him moving inside to guard, just based on the way he played and some of the negatives. I think those would be positives, or not necessarily positives, but they would be partially eradicated at guard, opposed to tackle, where you're on an island and things can get exposed in terms of, say, your footwork. That was one of the main things that I had for him. The foot quickness at times, and then the set depth itself was just very shallow, which he was able to get away with at Tulsa. But I think at the next level, he would kind of get exposed at if he was still at tackle, because he was taking very shallow kick slide steps, and that's not the worst thing in the world because you're not really opening up and giving people an inside track, but he didn't have the athleticism then to run the hoop with them necessarily and take them all the way around at that point, right? They would if he was playing better athletes, they would have been able to pretty quickly get upfield, bend the edge, and get a sack at tackle. But that's why I thought at guard in a phone booth things would look a lot better, and I really do believe that as we continue to get into some of his other positive traits. One of the other notes I wrote right away, getting into the positives, I had good motor, physical guy, very gritty, playing through the whistle, a force to be reckoned with in the running game. I gave him a 14.25 out of 15 as a run blocker, as well as a 14 out of 15 in strength, which in combination were the second highest combo of those two grades that I gave anybody in this draft class. The only other guy that was higher was Tyler Linderbaum, actually, who I thought was maybe a little bit grittier and a little bit more effective, but I think you get the point, right? Like, that's good company to be in, no question. I thought that his intensity was showing out against even the best levels of competition. I went back and watched some of his other games against, say, Cincy or Houston. I was hoping to see some of him against Logan Hall, and he really didn't disappoint in any game, no matter where I put him. Against OSU, didn't really disappoint. I thought he was rather impressive across the board. I thought that one thing that he was very effective at, and one of the reasons I did give him such a high physicality and finishing grade at 9.75 out of 10, if I hadn't mentioned that yet, was I mentioned blocking through the whistle, things of that nature, but the ability to battle through stalemates was, I should say, one of the most impressive things I've seen one of these offensive linemen do in a while, right? That's kind of rare where you're caught up at the line of scrimmage in a stalemate, but one guy is just going that much harder to where 3-4 seconds in a rep, all of a sudden now he's getting massive vertical movement, and I thought he was doing that. My note exactly was impressive ability to battle through stalemates late and get some vertical movement. And I thought that was impressive because plays that would have been quote-unquote neutral, if we were giving a grade on each play, plays that would have been a neutral grade pretty quickly became positives just as the plays progressed. And I really like that. If he wasn't winning right away, he was winning late, and there were very few losses in that regard, particularly as a run blocker. Some of the other negatives that I had, slightly inconsistent hand placement, which was a little bit of a question mark because it felt like he was playing from behind at times when guys would be able to, when he would miss with his hands and guys were able to get hands on him first. He was able to recover occasionally, but it just felt like because he was at a foot quickness deficit, he was also kind of at a hand placement deficit as well, if that makes any sense at all, because he was sort of trailing the guys off the bat. Like he wasn't able to get clean punches all the time either, which to me, again, that's a tackle problem, not a problem at guard, where that guy is already within an arm's length away from you, just when you're in your stance, right? Whereas tackle, you have to go meet him out on an island, as I said, in space, which is what Tyler's biggest weakness was, in my opinion, at tackle. I thought that another slight negative, which I don't want to necessarily say that it's easily fixable, but his leverage when climbing to the second level, I just thought he could be a little bit undisciplined at times, and he was kind of catching linebackers in his chest, and that wasn't always the biggest issue because he was so much bigger and stronger than these linebackers that he could kind of work with them from there. But instead of getting a clean fit and finish on those guys, there would be some plays where he was getting pushed back a little bit by guys that were, I don't want to say half his size, but he had a significant height and weight advantage on, and that was just because coming in high, late with his hands, and just lets him get in there unbeknownst to anybody, and then they're in on a play that they shouldn't even be close to, all things considered. That's a slight concern still at guards. Don't think that that's one that just goes away and disappears quite like the foot quickness. In that regard, I gave him a 6 out of 10 in leverage. He's rushing up to the second level, right? Like I said, he wasn't necessarily the most fleet of foot guy at that tackle position. So instead of, these clean releases up to linebacker like you might have at guard, a little bit more chasing had to be done at tackle, and it felt like sometimes he'd be flying up there as quickly as he could, rushing to get there, and then by the time he got there, the linebacker was already into him before he really even got hands on him. Like I said, that's just something that would be less of an issue if he had some better leverage and was maybe just a little bit, I don't want to say higher IQ, but kept his head on a swivel a little bit more, so that way he could see when guys were coming and he could maybe change his tempo and angles as a result, because that was one of the lower categories, that I gave him. I gave him a 5.5 out of 10 on IQ and awareness, which, if that's your lowest grade, that's not necessarily bad, but it is still something that that I think needs to be mentioned. Luckily, though, I would say that those sorts of things, keeping your head on a swivel, being more prepared for twists and stunts and those sorts of things, and when your defensive end drops in coverage, for example, being able to continue to set backwards, maybe give the guard a hand, and be on the lookout for maybe somebody else coming off the edge or a linebacker blitzing late, things of that nature. Those are all sort of coachable things, right? Whereas the motor is not really coachable, right? The powerful hands are not necessarily coachable. The solidly explosive athletic profile that he brings to the table, not very coachable, right? And if he has all those things, he's got the high motor, he's got really every baseline thing that you would want. Now you just got to put it all together with some coaching. And in that regard, you could argue that there's a chance he outperforms this grade, right? Because, 81.49, you could argue that with his upside, he should be a first-round guy in terms of my grade. Like I said, if I have him 21st on my big board right now, which is obviously a first-round grade, but based on the number itself, this is technically in my second-round category. Regardless, that's just semantics at that point. But you could make a real argument that he's got a decently high floor and a really high ceiling, so he'll be a fun guy to keep an eye on at the next level. Like I said, put all those grades together, and it came out to an 81.49, which at the time when I made that grade felt rather bold. Now it feels, I don't want to say it feels par for the course, but it feels a little bit less satisfying because he felt like a guy, kind of a diamond in the rough that I had found, and apparently the rest of the world got keyed into him as well because that dang impressive combine performance. But with that being said, if you thought this was an impressive video, that's probably a bit of a stretch, but you guys get what I'm saying. you guys know where I'm going with this. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, do all that stuff in the comment section down below. I'd like to hear your thoughts on Tyler. Hit the notification bell, all the things that I spiel on and on about every video. Just do them if you enjoyed the video and want to support the channel. I'd really appreciate it. I know I'm kind of spamming the subs with videos today, and if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that sub button, right? Because there's going to be a lot of other videos that either they're already out or they're going to be out, just in terms of prospect scouting reports, perhaps other guys that your team is looking into or that your team has now after the draft got. So with that being said, do all that fun stuff and be on the lookout for future videos. With that being said, that's all I have for you guys in this one. Peace.